The year is 1856. Imagine, if you can, a world where the horizon is not a destination, but a death sentence. To the west lies the California gold fields, to the east the burgeoning territory of Utah. Between them stands the Sierra Nevada, a jagged granite spine that the indigenous Washoe people called the source of the water, but which the white settlers of the mid-19th century called the Wall of Death. Historical records from this era show that when the first snowflakes fell in October, the world simply stopped. Communication died. The mountain passes, rising over 7,000 feet, became impassable graveyards of white silence. Families in remote mining camps lived in total isolation for 6 months of the year, cut off from medicine, news of loved ones, and the very pulse of the nation. It was into this frozen purgatory that a man named John Torsteinson Rue, known to history as John Snowshoe Thompson, stepped with nothing but 10-foot planks of oak and a soul forged in the Norwegian uplands. The crucial threshold begins not with a cheer, but with a chilling, suffocating desperation. Imagine standing at the edge of Placerville, looking toward the peaks. The wind is a physical blow, a literal wall of sub-zero air that reeks of ancient ice. The temperature has plummeted to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. At this elevation, the air is thin, punishing the lungs with every gasp. Most men would see this as a sign to retreat to the warmth of a hearth, but Thompson looks at the 90 miles of vertical wilderness ahead and sees a duty. He carries a mailbag weighing nearly 100 pounds, stuffed with letters from mothers to sons, legal documents that decide the fate of empires, and the hope of 1,000 isolated souls. To understand this moment, we must look at the forgotten customs of the mid-1850s. The mail was the only tether to sanity. To be without it was to be erased from existence. The technical danger Thompson faced was not merely the cold, but the whiteout. In the 1850s, navigation was a matter of intuition and celestial observation. There were no marked trails under 20 feet of snow. The harsh reality of the Sierra winters meant that a single misstep, 1 foot placed inches too far to the left, could trigger an avalanche, a cascading wall of thousands of tons of snow moving at 80 miles per hour. This is the crucial threshold, that agonizing split second where the human instinct for self-preservation battles the higher calling of honor. Thompson didn't use the short, wide snowshoes known to Americans of the time, which were cumbersome and slow. Instead, he relied on his ancestral knowledge of skis, or as they were then called, Norwegian snow skates. These were massive, heavy instruments of wood that required immense physical strength to maneuver. As he pushes off into the white abyss, the sound is not of a glide, but of a rhythmic, heavy thrum, shh, thrum, shh. Each stride is a gamble with gravity. The silence of the high Sierras is absolute, broken only by the groan of ice-laden pine trees that sound like snapping bones. He is alone. If he breaks a leg, he dies. If he loses his way, he dies. If the blizzard worsens and erases the stars, he is a ghost. Yet he moves forward. He moves because he understands that the mail is more than paper. It is the heartbeat of a frontier. This is the beginning of the end of isolation, a moment where one man decides that the mountains are not a barrier, but a bridge. He is crossing into a realm where nature does not forgive, where the blizzard is a living entity, and where his only companions are the 2 planks of wood beneath his feet and a compass etched into his very mind. Before we dive deeper into the archives of the past, subscribe to Wildbound History and tell us in the comments, what country and city are you watching from? To understand the man they called Snowshoe Thompson, we must first look at the forgotten customs of the mid-19th century frontier. In an era of steam engines and burgeoning telegraph lines, the Sierra Nevada remained a primitive fortress of granite and ice. Historical records from the 1850s show that while the rest of the world was accelerating, the high mountain passes slowed time to a crawl. The harsh reality of the 1850s meant that survival was not a matter of modern gear, but of ancestral wisdom. Thompson did not carry a tent. He did not carry a sleeping bag. He didn't even carry a compass in the traditional sense. His survival kit was stripped down to the absolute essentials of a man who understood that weight was the enemy of life. His primary tools, the 2 planks of wood, were not the lightweight carbon fiber skis of today. They were massive, hand-carved slabs of valley oak, measuring nearly 10 feet in length and weighing over 25 pounds. These were snow skates, a technology virtually unknown to Americans at the time, who were still struggling with the cumbersome, circular, webbed snowshoes that forced a slow, wide-legged waddle. Thompson's skis allowed him to glide over the top of 20-foot drifts that would have swallowed any other man whole. The sound of these wooden blades slicing through the crust of the snow was the only heartbeat in a frozen world, a rhythmic wooden clack that echoed through the canyons of the American River. His attire was a testament to the history of everyday life in the high Sierras. He wore heavy wool trousers, a flannel shirt, and a thick coat that would eventually become soaked with frozen sweat and external moisture. But his greatest asset was his boots, sturdy leather, greased with animal fat to repel the biting slush. Imagine the physical toll. Thompson carried a mail bag that often exceeded 80 pounds on his back. This bag contained the archive of life for the people of Genoa, Nevada. It held letters from homesick miners, desperate requests for medicine, and newspapers that were the only link to a nation on the brink of a civil war. Every ounce of that weight pressed into his shoulders, a literal burden of history that he bore across 90 miles of vertical wilderness. When the sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Carson Range, the temperature didn't just drop. It plummeted like a stone into a well. The transition from the golden light of the Sierra afternoon to the blue, lethal chill of the night is a sensory experience few modern people can comprehend. To stay alive, Thompson relied on the wisdom of the silence. He did not build a fire in the traditional sense, as the deep snow would simply melt beneath it, creating a wet, freezing pit. Instead, he sought out the base of a dead man pine or a granite overhang. Historical accounts describe him finding a flat rock, clearing away the snow with his skis and building a small, controlled fire of dry pine limbs. His bed was the snow itself. He would lay his skis down as a barrier against the frozen ground, wrap himself in a single thin blanket, and use the heavy mailbag as his pillow. There is a profound, stoic vulnerability in this image. A lone man, curled in the fetal position atop 10 feet of packed ice, with nothing but a few millimeters of wool between him and a sky so cold the stars seemed to crackle. He didn't eat gourmet rations. He carried a small piece of jerky, dried beef, and a handful of biscuits. He drank melted snow. To look at his diet and his gear is to see the raw resilience of the pioneer spirit, a refusal to be conquered by the elements. This was his routine for 20 years. While others waited for the spring thaw, Thompson became a human bridge. He was a living archive, a man who memorized the topography of the mountains by the feel of the wind against his face and the angle of the slope beneath his wooden planks. He understood that the mountains were not his enemy, but a host that demanded absolute respect. If he failed to read the texture of the snow, whether it was corn snow, powder, or crust, he would lose the momentum needed to crest the next 7,000-foot ridge. This was the craftsmanship of survival, a mastery of the physical world that has been largely lost in our age of GPS and synthetic fibers. To stand atop the Sierra crest in the dead of winter is to understand a silence so profound it borders on the divine. Historical records from this era suggest that for the mid-19th century traveler, the greatest threat wasn't always the frostbite or the wolves, it was the crushing weight of the great alone. In an age before the constant hum of electricity or the digital tether of the modern world, being 90 miles into a frozen wilderness meant you were, for all intents and purposes, on another planet. The psychological isolation of John "Snowshoe" Thompson was a feat of mental fortitude that rivals his physical endurance. To understand this moment, we must look at the forgotten customs of the pioneers. They were people of community, of shared hearths and loud saloons. To leave that warmth and step into a white vacuum for 3 days and nights required a specific kind of internal iron. The geography of the Sierras, with its deep granite-walled canyons like the Royal Arches and the treacherous slopes of Echo Summit, acted as a natural sensory deprivation chamber. When the sun reflects off the pristine snow, it creates a phenomenon known as snow blindness, where the world dissolves into a featureless, blinding white. The brain, starved for landmarks, begins to falter. The harsh reality of the 1850s meant that a man's only compass was his own psyche. Thompson's isolation was absolute. There was no rescue party coming for a mail carrier. There was no radio to call for help. If a blizzard descended, as they frequently did, dropping up to 5 feet of snow in a single sitting, Thompson was forced to navigate by the stars, or more often, by the feel of the wind against his cheek. Imagine the mental tax of such a journey. Every shadow cast by a twisted juniper tree could be a predator. Every crack of a freezing branch could be the footstep of a grizzly or a mountain lion. Yet, the historical accounts tell us Thompson never carried a gun. He claimed it was useless weight. This decision reveals a man who had moved past fear into a state of total ecological integration. He didn't fight the mountain. He became a part of its winter rhythm. The impact of this isolation on the human mind is documented in the journals of other explorers of the time, who spoke of mountain fever or the auditory hallucinations brought on by the thin air and the unrelenting wind. But Thompson was different. He possessed a wisdom of the silence that allowed him to remain grounded. He used the stars, Polaris and the Great Bear, not just as navigational tools, but as silent companions. In the deep of the night, huddled under a granite ledge with the temperature hovering at 30 below zero, the psychological pressure to simply give up, to let the big sleep of hypothermia take over, must have been immense. Historical analysis of pioneer survival suggests that those who survived long-term isolation did so through a rigid adherence to routine. For Thompson, that routine was the mail. The letters in his bag weren't just cargo, they were a psychological anchor. He knew that in the valley below, people were counting the days until Snowshoe appeared on the horizon like a winter ghost. This sense of duty acted as a barrier against the creeping madness of the cold. He was the only thread holding the West together. To fail was to let the darkness win, not just for himself, but for the entire frontier. He navigated the internal landscape of his own loneliness with the same precision he used to navigate the treacherous cliffs of Slippery Ford, proving that the strongest tool a pioneer possessed wasn't the axe or the rifle, but the unbreakable will to remain sane in a world gone white. There is a moment in every survivor's journey where the physical world conspires to break the human spirit. For John Thompson, this breaking point arrived not as a single event, but as a recurring nightmare of ice and gravity. Historical records from the mid-1850s detail the Great Winter of 1856–57, a season so brutal that it buried entire mining cabins up to their chimneys. It was during this period that Thompson faced his most harrowing trial, a 48-hour window where the line between the living and the dead became as thin as a frost-covered window pane. Imagine the scene. Thompson is at the summit of the Carson Pass, 8,600 feet above sea level. The wind has shifted from a steady gale to a screaming nor'easter, a horizontal wall of ice crystals that strip the bark from the trees and the skin from the face. Visibility is zero. To understand this moment, we must look at the forgotten customs of alpine survival. When a blizzard of this magnitude strikes, the standard procedure is to burrow into the snow and wait. But Thompson knew that to stop moving in a Sierra whiteout was to invite the sleep of the snow. If he sat down, the drift would bury him in minutes, creating a tomb of compressed ice. The breaking point came when he encountered a blind cornice, a massive, overhanging lip of wind-driven snow that looked like solid ground, but was actually a hollow trap suspended over a 1,000-foot drop. In the blinding white, Thompson felt the world give way. One of his 10-foot oak skis snapped with a crack that sounded like a rifle shot in the thin air. He was plunged chest-deep into a soft, suffocating powder that acted like quicksand. This is the climax of the pioneer experience, the instant where gear fails, the body is exhausted, and the mountain demands its tribute. The physical toll was immense. His core temperature began to drop, a condition we now know as Stage 2 hypothermia. In this state, the muscles lose coordination, and the mind begins to wander into a lethal apathy. But Thompson did not succumb. Using his remaining ski as a lever and his bare, frost-nipped hands to claw at the granite beneath the snow, he fought for every inch. Historical analysis of his route suggests he spent 6 hours traversing a single mile during this storm. Every breath was a battle against the siren song of the cold, which whispers to the weary traveler that it would be so easy to just close his eyes. He reached a small, abandoned trapper's shack near Lake Tahoe, only to find it filled with snow and occupied by a man near death, James Sisson, whose feet had already turned black with gangrene. The breaking point was no longer just about Thompson's survival, it was about the moral weight of another soul. Despite his own shattered ski and near-total exhaustion, Thompson did not leave. He spent the night rubbing Sisson's frozen limbs, sharing his meager heat, and then, in a feat of strength that defies modern medical understanding, he set out again into the storm to bring back a rescue party. This was the raw reality of the 1850s. A man's worth was measured by his refusal to break when the world around him shattered. Thompson pushed through the final miles to Genoa, his legs moving on pure muscle memory, his vision a blur of grey and white. When he finally stumbled into the settlement, he didn't ask for food or warmth first. He handed over the mailbag. He had stared into the white throat of the Sierra winter and refused to be swallowed. This was not just a delivery, it was a victory of the human pulse over the absolute zero of the wilderness. When the heavy oak skis finally stilled and the roar of the blizzard faded into a rhythmic drip of melting icicles, the true weight of John Thompson's journey began to settle. The historical aftermath of his 20-year vigil over the Sierra Nevada is a sobering study in the history of everyday life and the frequently cold indifference of the governments men serve. Historical records from the 1870s reveal a startling and heart-wrenching reality. For 2 decades of defying death, for thousands of miles traversed in the white vacuum, and for hundreds of lives potentially saved by the medicine and news he carried, John "Snowshoe" Thompson was never paid a single cent by the United States Postal Service. To understand this moment, we must look at the forgotten customs of the mid-19th century bureaucracy. Thompson operated under a verbal agreement with local postmasters in a time when the federal government was distracted by the bloody upheaval of the American Civil War and the subsequent Reconstruction. Because he had no formal contract signed in the hallowed halls of Washington, D.C., his Herculean efforts were classified as voluntary. In the eyes of the law, he was a ghost. In the eyes of the people of Genoa and Placerville, he was a god. The harsh reality of the 1870s meant that even a hero could find himself at the mercy of a ledger book that had no room for courage as a line item. As the dust, or rather, the powder, settled on his career, the physical aftermath became apparent. Thompson's body was a map of his struggles. His joints, weathered by decades of sub-zero temperatures and the repetitive, bone-jarring impact of skiing with a 100-pound pack, began to fail him. Yet, he never complained. There is a stoic, almost ancient dignity in the way Thompson transitioned from the mailman of the Sierras to a simple farmer in Diamond Valley. He had spent 20 years in a psychological and physical breaking point, and the aftermath was a quiet, profound peace. He had done what no other man could, and he had done it for the sake of the community, not the coin. The legacy of his route is etched into the very geography of the West. The paths he forged through the impassable snow became the blueprints for the stagecoach roads, and eventually the highways that now slice through the mountains. To look at the Sierra Nevada today is to see a landscape tamed by the footprints of a man who refused to believe in impossible. The historical aftermath isn't just found in textbooks. It's found in the fact that the West survived its most isolated era because one man decided that the silence of the mountains was a conversation he was willing to have. By the time of his death in 1876 at the age of 49, Thompson had become a living legend. He died not from a blizzard, but from a common ailment, liver disease, a mundane end for a man who had survived the most violent tantrums of Mother Nature. His headstone in Genoa, Nevada, features a pair of crossed skis, a silent tribute to the tools that bridged two worlds. The historical aftermath teaches us that true resilience often goes unrewarded by the institutions of man, but it is forever immortalized in the spirit of the land. He was the precursor to the modern mountaineer, the father of American skiing, and the final word on what it means to keep one's word when the world is freezing over. To look upon the snow-capped peaks of the Sierra Nevada today is to witness a monument to a man who refused to let the winter win. The legacy of John "Snowshoe" Thompson is not merely found in the mail he delivered or the miles he conquered. It is found in the very definition of American resilience. Historical records from the late 19th century show that Thompson's influence sparked a cultural revolution. Before him, skiing was a desperate survival tactic of the Norse. After him, it became the heartbeat of Western winter sport and travel. He was the first to prove that the Great Wall of the Sierras was not a barrier, but a gateway. The philosophical weight of his life challenges our modern understanding of comfort and connectivity. In our age of instantaneous digital communication, we often forget the history of everyday life in the 1850s, where a single letter carried on the back of a lone man was the only thing keeping a family whole or a business alive. To understand this moment, we must look at the forgotten customs of the pioneers. They did not value speed, they valued the word. Thompson's word was his bond, a currency more stable than the gold being pulled from the California hills. His legacy is a silent rebuke to a world that often prioritizes the easy path over the honorable one. As we reflect on this archival journey, we see that Thompson's story is a profound documentary of the human spirit's ability to adapt. He took the ancient wisdom of his Norwegian ancestors and applied it to the raw, untamed geography of the American West. He was a bridge between the old world and the new, between the silence of the wilderness and the noise of civilization. The harsh reality of the 1880s meant that many names were lost to the biting winds of time. But Snowshoe remains, a phantom gliding through the pines, a reminder that one person, armed with nothing but determination and 2 planks of wood, can change the course of history. We honor John Thompson not because he was a man of iron, but because he was a man of flesh and blood who chose to act with the strength of iron. He showed us that isolation does not have to mean loneliness, and that the stars are enough to guide a soul home. His journey across 90 miles of deadly blizzards was a 20-year prayer for the survival of the West. Today, as the high-speed transit lines and heated SUVs traverse those same passes in minutes, we must remember the rhythmic thrum-shh of the oak skis. We must remember the man who slept in the snow so that the world didn't have to go cold. Thank you for exploring the untamed past with us at Wildbound History. If you believe these stories of resilience must never be forgotten, hit the like button and subscribe for our next historical journey. Until next time, stay wild.